Yup, so it finally happened. The haters have gotten what they have always wanted. There's trouble in Critical Role time. But it's not what you think. There's a lot more going on here. Now, I've been covering Critical Role for a while now, and the last time that I talked about them, things were looking pretty grim. At that stage, the third Critical Role campaign had been lagging in views. Candela Obscura, their hot new spin-off game, was kinda bombing, and critics of Critical Role were rubbing their hands together with glee in the manner of what I thought at the time was an old-timey robber baron villain. But apparently, it just means that you're a lesbian in Brazil. Apparently, I was sending all the wrong signals. Muito obrigado for the emails, ladies. But this latest development has taken the Critical Role and Dungeons & Dragons community totally by surprise. And honestly, it's pretty gnarly, so you might want to strap in here. Now, before we go further, I want to acknowledge that first of all, I like Critical Role. I have to say this in like every single video covering Critical Role because it feels like the moment you slap a Matt Mercer in your thumbnail, death threats start showing up in your inbox. I think on YouTube there's a general suspicion of anyone that covers stories about Matt Mercer and the Critical Role gang because it does sometimes draw unsavory characters. But I mean, look at me. I mean, I'm Irish. The Irish have never been thought of as unsavory. And to get it out there, I think that what Critical Role have achieved is actually really awesome. So believe me when I say, this latest news kinda sucks. See, fans recently got horrible Critical Role news, and it all started with a devastating email. Let me read it to you now. Oh, hold on. I've just won a sweepstakes that I don't remember entering. Finally, this is my ticket out of here. I've hit it YouTube from day one. So screw the algorithm, screw Dungeons & Dragons, and most of all, screw you, loyal viewers. Ha 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 ha. Fill in my name, address, social security number for verification purposes, and yeah, so all my data was literally just stolen. Now there's 36 digital versions of me in the Philippines. Can I take back that last screw you? Either way, in totally unrelated news, today's video is sponsored by Incogni. And even if you have not been tricked into giving your details to a frankly kind of obvious in retrospect scam email, your personal data is already online thanks to the near continual data breaches of legitimate databases, which, you know, is happening more and more every single day. And of course, don't forget about all the efforts of data brokers who currently are selling your personal data, even including your search history, to businesses, marketing agencies, and scammers. But if you sign up with Incogni, they will hunt down all your data online, find out who the hell is selling it, and get your details removed from data broker lists, stopping all those spam and scam emails and robocalls right at the source. Incogni work continually feeding back to you all the details about the requests that they have sent, which have been successful and which are still in progress. They continually work to ensure your privacy, stopping your data from being handed over to scammers, spammers, and businesses. Incogni are so good, in fact, that I had to actually make up that spam sweepstakes email earlier as a conceit for this very ad. I actually love you, loyal viewer. Please don't ever leave me. And take back your personal data with Incogni. Simply use the code DUNGEONS at the link below and get an absolutely insane 60% off an annual plan. That's at incogni.com/dungeons. And a massive thanks to Incogni for sponsoring today's video. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, that's right, the email. So this month, Whiz Kids sent out an email warning Critical Role fans that Critical Role content is now being cancelled, ended, over, donezo. And that is, that's kind of weird, right? Especially if you're a fan of Critical Role like me. I mean, Critical Role is massive. It couldn't have just failed, could it? I mean, unfortunately, we live in 2024, aka Earth 2, so I'm beginning to think that we're not in prime reality anymore. In fact, I'm starting to think that we are the Mirrorverse. We're not Earth Prime at all. You know, the one that the crime lords took over? I think that's us. It's the only way I can explain all the weird shit that's happening to us. And this news about Critical Role is new evidence of my totally not insane theory. But I hear you cry, what the hell does Whiz Kids even have to do with Critical Role? What of Critical Roles do they have to cancel? Well, it turns out that if you didn't already know, Critical Role have been partnered with Whiz Kids for a while now to produce a whole extensive miniature line of Critical Role characters and NPCs and probably historical world leaders for Matt Mercer's secret private collection of post-war settlement dioramas.
If you bought FDR, we could get together and model Yalta.
I mean, I'm just guessing about that last last one. And this Critical Role miniature line is huge, and it is being pushed really hard by the Whiz Kids company. In fact, it's so big that on the Whiz Kids official store, Critical Role have their very own section, just under Dungeons and Dragons. Suck it, Pathfinder! There's a lot of minis here, from Darrington Brigade, the Crown Keepers, Tomb Takers, and hundreds of different NPCs and monsters, a bunch of pre-painted miniatures, and if you're a fan of Critical Role and want to play a Critical Role at home, Whiz Kids have you covered. You just have to bring the 5-star voice acting talent, which, is obviously the easy part. And recently, there was an expansion planned to this miniature line, one called Heroes of Exandria, Calamity, containing 6 pre-painted miniatures, as well as a separate release of a frankly extremely cool pre-painted miniature called the Shade Mother, based on the Shade Mother from Critical Role. But just recently, both of these 2 sets were cancelled. All the pre-orders were refunded, and thousands of voices raised up in unison saying, "What the fuck?" Especially because Critical Role have actually spent a ton of time advertising these new miniatures on their show, trying to get people to pre-order them. In fact, I think that these were originally announced in like 2023. People have been waiting on these for a really long time, but now they're never coming out. And the reason? Well, it has been reported that these miniatures have been cancelled because nobody bought them. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that this has ever happened before to a Critical Role anything. Usually the critters are pretty ravenous, protective, and hungry for more content, as all the YouTube comments below about my vanishingly shorter lifespan will attest. Now, critics have seized upon this cancellation to declare that it is a sign of the end of Critical Role, as they now face a waning popularity, evidently, and are just a short stop away from irrelevancy. And, on the face of it, they might have a little bit of a point. Critical Role views were trending down for a while there, and it feels like Critical Role's space as the spot for Dungeons and Dragons actual play is waning. And honestly, overall, the Dungeons and Dragons boom just feels like it's in the rearview mirror now. And whether Critical Role got popular because of Dungeons and Dragons, or Dungeons and Dragons got popular because of Critical Role, both of these things feed on each other, and the hype for their respective properties is starting to slow down a little, which is never great when you literally exist because of hype. Like a Mr. Freeze, only instead of needing his suit to be really cold or he dies, he needs people to tell him that he did a really good job. I want a backpat suit now. I guess that's basically just YouTube subscribers. Hey, you should subscribe to this channel. Please, I need this to survive. But for a new major Critical release to perform so badly that it had to be cancelled before it even came out is really bad news, not only for Critical Role, but for the overall health of the RPG ecosystem, especially Dungeons and Dragons. This is like a canary in a coal mine here, people, and it just died. But here's the thing, we're not witnessing the end of Critical Role here, but we are probably looking at the end of Critical Role miniatures, and that's probably, honestly, deserved, because seriously, when you look at these things, they're fucking mental. They're really, really weird, dude. They probably shouldn't exist. And unless something drastic changes, this miniature line is doomed. And before the critters come to get me in my sleep, just let me explain. See, Whiz Kids produce these miniatures, but Whiz Kids is a mass production kind of miniature company. They are possibly the least niche company in the extremely niche wargame market around. They pretty much mass produce the D&D equivalent of Green Army Men. Their miniatures tend to be soft, rubbery plastic and cheap, but that makes them robust, cheerful, and sell very well as a result. For example, their Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures line is the #2 most sold miniature line in the entire, and I mean the entire tabletop market. They're just behind Warhammer 40k, and that's pretty wild actually. Warhammer 40k is pretty much guaranteed now to be the #1 nerd interest of the next 2 decades. And Games Workshop, the creators of Warhammer, have just made enough money recently to buy 3 dozen cocaine factories to ethically supply their executive bathrooms. There's a lot of money in miniatures at the very top, and Whiz Kids, they're up there. So at first blush, it makes total sense that Critical Role and Whiz Kids would partner together to make a whole line of miniatures, especially considering that Critical Role and Whiz Kids have a really close business relationship, and Whiz Kids even do the Dungeons and Dragons miniatures. The only problem is that just like the Nazis hunting down the Ark of the Covenant, this was a huge mistake, and it's going to result in everyone's faces melting. And also, Indiana Jones won't be relevant to this plot at all. Oh, actually, shouldn't have said Nazis there, not been demonetized, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/discoursminiatures, because I keep getting demonetized by YouTube for some reason. But as much as this relationship makes sense from a business perspective, it's resulted in an unholy abomination, because the thing about Whiz Kids miniatures is, well, look at them. They're low quality. They're made out of soft plastic that doesn't hold detail very well. They feel rubbery. They've got mushy details and lame poses, and honestly, they just have massive problems like huge mold lines that ruin their aesthetic. They're ultimately best treated as game pieces rather than collectible models, because they just ain't much to look at. And some people will take umbrage at me saying this, but hear me out here. I am what you would call pretty big into miniatures. I own a lot of people, and most of them are made out of plastic, metal, and resin. I own too many of them, from Warhammer to Infinity to the Batman miniatures game to Dark Sword miniatures to Black Scorpion, Star Wars Legion, Shatterpoint Reaper minis, Bushido Carnivale, Bad Dragon, Blood and Plunder, Warlord games, Mantic games, and okay, I have to stop listing brands now before I accidentally name something I wasn't meant to. And frankly, the Whiz Kids miniatures line, it cannot compare to the fidelity and detail of any of those manufacturers I just listed. And some of them were high-end and others were low-end, but they are all miniatures first companies, and they all produce superior models to Whiz Kids. And in fact, I wouldn't even compare the Critical Role Whiz Kids minis to any of those war game miniature companies at all. If you were to ask me, I'd put the quality of the Critical Role miniatures closer to plastic dinosaur toys that you can steal from any child's school bag. Seriously, they really struggle to stop you. They're very small. And that might sound like a total diss, and I guess it kind of is, but honestly, it's fine that that's the case. The Critical Role miniatures are game pieces first. They're not really designed to be built, painted, and shown off on your shelf for their entire lifespan, the way that most Warhammer fans will treat their Warhammer 40k models. The Critical Role miniatures, like most of Whiz Kids miniatures, are designed to be played with in games of Dungeons and Dragons, and therefore their low quality, soft, rubbery makeup is just part of their charm, and it makes them immune to breaking when you fling them across the room in a fit of anger because you rolled a 1 again. And it's evident that they're designed to be played with primarily because a whole bunch of them can actually be bought pre-painted. They come with paint already on them. A lot of bad paint jobs, but they're already ready to play with. In fact, that's actually the main focus of the Critical Role range. And that's all fine and good, except not only are the miniatures pretty low quality, the pre-painted miniatures are also really fucking expensive, like super expensive, like $60 for a couple of miniatures expensive. This is an insane price point for models like this. These are not priced like generic cheap miniatures for your D&D games, but that's what they are. And yet they are priced as collectibles. They're priced as if they are up to the standards of Warhammer, Infinity, Dark Sword, or Black Scorpion miniatures. And that's simply because they have the Critical Role brand and they come pre-painted. And yes, pre-painting does justify an increase in price, but that's because pre-painted miniature costs are extremely unreasonable. I've seen inside these factories. With pre-painted minis, you're essentially paying for an impoverished Chinese child to paint your miniature for you. Okay, that's not strictly true. They're not always kids. Sometimes they're very elderly and at the end of their life. And maybe, yeah, that amount of labor probably should cost quite a lot. I mean, it does, but it leads to extremely expensive miniatures at the end of the day. And the end result is that they still look like they should come free in a box of Cocoa Pops. And so taken all together, this all adds up to a really weird product line. Like, what the hell is going on with the Critical Role miniatures line? Sure, some people will want to buy an expensive painted collectible of their favorite Critical Role characters, but how many people want to pay $50 for a soft plastic, roughly detailed, badly painted gaming miniature of their favorite Critical Role characters and random NPCs? It's a weird audience that Critical Role and Whiz Kids are going after with this one. And don't get me wrong, even with all that said, I'd still probably buy some of these, but I'm a little weirdo talking about Critical Role on YouTube. Don't cater to me, cater to normal people. Man, I just spent $300 on glue. Admittedly, that's to consume. And perhaps what's even worse tier for Critical Role and Whiz Kids is that these new cancelled miniatures aren't alone. They're just the beginning, because generally from what I've been hearing, Critical Role miniatures are now becoming infamous for not selling at all at the recommended retail price. And the only way that they do sell is when they're put on deep clearance pricing with massive discounts. And it sounds to me like retailers are now cutting their losses and no longer pre-ordering or buying new Critical Role miniatures to sell to the public. And these new minis, they're just the first to be hit by it pretty hard, but I don't think they're going to be the last. Either way, I don't think that it's right that Critical Role and Whiz Kids use customer money as secret Kickstarters. Apparently, they needed these pre-orders to go through before the miniatures were ever going to be created and sold. But that's not right. If you pay for miniatures, you should get them. This is not Kickstarter. Cash should not be taken and then have to be refunded because funding goals apparently weren't met. If you want to let me pre-order something, it should be something that exists. These products shouldn't be getting crowdfunded. That's not right. It's not great for consumers. And it will be a pretty dark future if that becomes the norm. But all that said, this latest cancellation is a reflection of their miniature line and why it is just a really weird product offering and not the show. The show itself actually has massively ballooned in new viewers recently, or returning viewers, probably because the Critical Role Campaign 3 is nearly concluded, and as part of that, Critical Role have actually brought back a ton of fan favorite Mighty Nine and Vox Machina characters, and this has actually led to record viewership both on YouTube and Twitch, but also on Beacon, their very own streaming service. It seems like people are really loving the conclusion to Campaign 3. So honestly, at this stage, it's now feeling like the lagging views before was just Campaign 3, people had lost interest. But Critical Role might be on the rise again, and I personally hope that they use this new burst of enthusiasm from their audience to plug Daggerheart and move to a Daggerheart actual play series, because, I mean, honestly, I've been enjoying my games with Daggerheart, and I think it suits the Critical Role playstyle a whole lot more. Plus, you know, it's always nice to have more competition for Dungeons and Dragons. But if you enjoyed any of this video, and don't worry, I'm used to people hating me after I've taken them for a ride, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/discourse miniatures and help me continue to cover the tabletop news with a burst of fun and myopic tunnel vision. And a massive thanks to my patrons, especially CryptoKev, and I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye.